and welcome to Contourcast. My name's Kat Boyd and I'm joined with my glamorous co-host David Jameson.
I'm doing good. Before you ask, I was out in the snow. Very, very pleasant. But apart from that, everything's still shit because of lockdown. Is there any word, by the way, on when this is going to end? This lockdown.
I think it's the end of February.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see.
I think this lockdown in particular has been really difficult, I think, for a lot of people. I'm just not. I feel myself becoming more and more neurotic daily.
I've had terrible problems sleeping, as I've said to you before, with vividness of dreams. But I think this is at this point. The lockdown was contained to 2020. It felt like it wasn't such a big deal. Now that it's pulled across 2 years, we all have to come to terms with the reality that a significant portion of our lives has now been sort of squandered by this situation. I mean, it started to occur to me that there's a good chance there won't be kind of normal holiday stuff going on this summer, at which point I start, do you know what I mean? First world problems, me spat the dummy, because I thought that's too much. 2 years of lost holidays is too much. This is why I will never adapt to like a green economy, by the way. I must be on a plane heading out of Scotland at least once a year.
I mean, I don't think that that's like wanting a holiday is necessarily first world problems. Do you know what I mean? Like, I'm sure that people the world over are really sick of this shit.
No, absolutely. But the thought of that of 2 consecutive years without a big change of scenery. I keep looking at old holiday pictures.
Yeah. I could really, really do with some sun. I'm not going to lie. I could really use, that the sun that you only really get outside of Britain. It has to be a European hot sun.
Yeah, and I'm so pale. Like, I mean, I've got Irish and Scottish ancestry, so I was pretty pale anyway. But now I'm translucent. You know what I mean? You can see through me. I've reached new depths of paleness.
I think you just used some fake tan.
You'd love that, or one of those beds.
Yeah, like a tanning bed.
I may do. I mean, if this goes on any longer, then I might have to. So,
what's on the agenda?
We're deep into the Scottish Government inquiry. The Holyrood inquiry into the Scottish Government's mishandlings of the complaints against Alex Salmond. Next week will be the final week of evidence. Nicola Sturgeon is still the headline acts. It's all been leading up to this. Nicola Sturgeon's doing her turn. Unless I'm wrong, there are still questions over whether Alex Salmond will be submitting his evidence to the committee, though it looks like he won't because wrangling over what will be officially submitted in evidence to the final report and so on, and other things connected. But there's a fallout between Salmond's camp and the committee, and it's very complex because it's not just between him and the committee per se, it's also there's falling out within or between the committee and people who they take legal advice from and so on, as far as I understand it. So the committee, the inquiry, which has looked shaky throughout, now looks slightly ridiculous. Basically, the whole procedure looks a bit farcical. But we've had all of Peter Murrell's evidence, which has been an odd and slightly amusing watch, and we're still just to have Nicola Sturgeon's.
Yeah, I know what you mean about will Salmond give his evidence or not, because there have been a lot of twists and turns in this, I say this case, this episode, this tale. Like, honestly, day by day, there's, different twists and turns. So let's bring people up to date, right? So this week we had Peter Murrell giving evidence on Monday, and he looked quote unquote shifty throughout. But this was particularly highlighted when Jackie Bailey asked why he kept looking off to his left and was there someone there. We'll come back to that. Then Jackie Bailey and Murdo Fraser, who are the two lead Unionist inquiry members, they've obviously decided that Murrell has patently perjured himself. So they've written to the Lord Advocate urging him to prosecute Murrell. Then Chris McElhenny, who's an SNP member, urged the SNP to suspend Murrell while the NEC investigates whether he's brought the party into disrepute. Then Sue Ruddock, who's the chief operating officer, claimed that Salmond had assaulted her back in, I think, 2008. And this was then immediately contradicted by the person who worked for the chief whip at the time, who was the only person to witness the event. And then she said that she thought that there was a conspiracy against Salmond. Like, so that all happened in one day. That all happened on Monday.
Yeah.
Like, so this is the, trying to keep up with this is wild, and nobody really knows what all the madness really means. And just to go back to the madness, when Murrell gave his evidence on Monday and he kept looking off to the left of the screen, because obviously what gives it a surreal turn is that this is all being done remotely. So you have it's not in the committee room in Holyrood, it's being done remotely. So you have Jackie Bailey, Murdo Fraser, Linda Fabiani, Peter Murrell, all in their houses, I guess. And the evidence that Peter Murrell's being questioned on is whether he was at home when the meeting with Alex Salmond took place, yes or no. And he's saying that he arrived home just as the meeting was ending. And that's kind of, yeah, that's his position, I think. It just gets quite farcical. But anyway, apparently, well, no, I have watched the video. So he kept looking off to the left of his screen. And Jackie Bailey was basically like, is someone else in the room with you? I think, like, implying that he was being coached by someone. But he said that he kept seeing a magpie out of his window. Which how many more surreal twists is going to happen?
It was so odd, that statement about the magpie. It made me instantly think about the scene. There's a famous scene in The Sopranos, of many famous scenes, where Christopher is being made, spoilers, if you're only on your fourth watch of it, Christopher is being made, a made man. He's taken down into a basement, and he's doing all the ritual and so on to join the crime family. And he's rubbing his hands over a burning image of St. Peter and repeats, "May I burn in hell if I betray my friends and the family." And then he looks off to his left and sees a crow pecking at the window, sort of ominously. It just instantly jumped to mind. And he took that as a premonition of a future where he would, where he might betray his friends. So yeah, it was extremely odd watching. And yeah, this, by the way, this isn't the first time that figures in the SNP have been accused of reading things off camera and so on, or being coached off camera. This also came up during Nicola Sturgeon's impromptu broadcast on Twitter relating to infighting in the SNP over the GRA and all this. This is at the time when Joanna Cherry, this is another thing that's going on, is she was obviously removed from the front bench for disloyalty and so on. Yeah, so it's absolute carnage in there. As for, it's very hard to see at this point what the eventual outcome of the inquiry is. I think if you were sober-minded looking at this entire situation, you basically have to say it reflects badly on just about everyone involved. And if we were in an even slightly different political atmosphere, if we didn't have this strange thing going on where the pole position of the SNP was propped up by a range of things, Boris Johnson, Brexit, pandemic, I think everyone would be saying this is a catastrophe for the SNP, and much more broadly than that, it's a catastrophe for the institutions of Scottish democracy, which look mighty foolish. And it's also a catastrophe for the kind of, it's weird to think that only a few years ago, do you remember this stuff during the 2014 referendum? You would always have figures like Salmon, but many others as well, saying devolution, the importance of devolution is it's proof that Scots can have a better political system. We can have a better democracy, right? Because people like the Scottish Parliament much more than they like the Westminster Parliament and all this kind of stuff. Strange to think that people used to say that, given that today, when you actually look back on the record, this is a government that's been in power since 2007, and it's totally obvious that it's a circus in there, that there's very little democracy or accountability at the top of the government. People have been saying this for a long time, but I think it's apparent to much wider groups of people now that the country is being governed in quite a bizarre and kind of secretive and unaccountable fashion. And there doesn't seem to be the institutional heft outside of the Scottish government to do anything about it. You know, this, I mean, you've got actual committee members on the committee in charge of the inquiry now saying, we don't think our own inquiry is up to this task.
Are we going to have an inquiry into the inquiry?
We should have an inquiry into the inquiry and an inquiry into that as well. But I mean, Jackie Baillie.
I'm quite enjoying Jackie Baillie at the moment, like in a sort of like mad way. Did you see that press release she put out quoting Craig Murray? I thought that was quite a strange thing to happen. Like I did feel a bit sort of through the looking glass.
Craig Murray's blog is now performing vital democratic functions that a real Scottish media should be performing, but isn't, because there are, I mean, the situation in Scottish media is totally ludicrous. I don't even feel angry about it anymore. I just feel sad. Like,
I mean, what I want to know is, like, what is the ratio of SNP fake indie campaigns to SNP scandals?
Yeah, that's a good point. I saw, so I mean, over the last few days, there's been, now Scotland's been launched, but that's like a non-SNP thing.
Have you joined?
And it's like, I'm not a member presently.
I have
think
joined.
About 2000. Oh, have you? But it's the rival, the latest SNP thing, or it looks like it is to me, is a scheme where you have private conversations with people and convince them of independence. But it very much has the look of the same campaign thrown out seriously every year since 2016. And variously as a data harvesting operation or a money raising operation by the SNP. There have been so many. I still see around that little yes. Do you remember they came up with a thing that was like basically called the Yes campaign, but it wasn't, and it's like a multicolored yes. I still see that thing around, and I'm like, what is that supposed to indicate at this point? Yeah. What is yes? What question is being answered here?
I remember that it was a rebrand of the Yes campaign, and then there's also the is the private conversations, is that the task force? I mean,
no, that's a different thing.
Oh, I mean, like none of these are going to actually, like, none of these are strategies for winning independence, as far as I can tell. I mean, I think the big thing is, are Sturgeon and Murrell going to be able to survive the most recent scandal before the election? I think they will, right? and I think that there's loads of really interesting contradictions happening in Scottish politics just now, because I think that the leadership and the membership are really factionalized in the SNP. I think that people are in like camps where they're quite bedded in as well. I think that Sturgeon probably will have to go. I think that Murrell will have to go. I think they'll hold on till after the election, but I don't know who the like Sturgeon successor is, like from her grouping within the party. But the interesting thing is that her ratings in the polls are still so high, and the SNP will win the election. They might not get a majority, but they will win the election in May. Yeah, I think that that's potentially got serious risks attached for the independence movement itself. My concern is that support for independence collapses and you have the liberal middle classes, the kind of Sturgeon base, beginning to unite around that third option on the ballot paper, you know, the kind of Gordon Brown, full devolution. And it would be a Civic Scotland effort. You know, with the STUC put out a blog recently, I think it was like last week, talking about the third option on the paper and their support for that. And I understand why, but like, I really hate that type of like, we've found a fix for the difficult problem type thing. Like, I mean, I'm quite open-minded. Like, I mean, I've just never had anyone convince me that Devo Max is the solution to what the problem is, which is like, it's a democratic problem that we have. It's like, nobody's been able to convince me that further devolution doesn't just mean devolution of the axe. You know, I have this vision of Gordon Brown doing a sort of like UK together federalism, like let's unite against Brexit, or do you know what I mean? Just like real liberal centrist nonsense. You know, that could happen if Sturgeon goes and the liberal middle classes find themselves without the person that represents them.
Yeah, I think it's a possibility, and we're talking over several years. I think that would be a glacial movement if the independence movement couldn't overcome its current kind of obstacles. But yeah, I'm very suspicious of all that stuff. I mean, that would work only if I think it had significant. I mean, I've never thought that the long-term way in which the British state will deal with the impasse in Scotland is by just saying no forever. Sooner or later, they're presumably going to make a different type of play, and I wouldn't be surprised if a three-option referendum, or, you know, flying that kite at the very least, is part of the response. We've already got people like Gordon Brown having talks with the UK government about advancing this position. There is so little organic public support at this juncture for that kind of third option thing. But I think we need to remember that it was only a few years ago, 2012, when the Edinburgh Agreement was being debated between Westminster and Holyrood. I remember all of us saying, you know, if that third option gets on the ballot paper, we can forget about Scottish independence, and and we've lost a very important political moment in Scotland's history, because we're not, willing to lay that challenge down, because it was widely expected that a third option, a Devo Max type option, would have, had it been on the ballot paper in 2014. Things have changed since because of that social movement, but how much longer can the agony of the independence movement continue? The SNP leadership is in no hurry to bring about an independence referendum for reasons good and bad. But they are still saying, they haven't retracted this claim that there's going to be an independence referendum in 6 months' time, right? And every year since 2016, they've said this. We have been 6 months from an independence referendum, at all times since 2016. And then they're upset that it all breaks down in grades internally. That was inevitable. Like, if you keep stoking up, you keep revving people up for an independence referendum that never comes. So, yeah, I think there are serious threats to the independence movement. I wouldn't be surprised if a decomposition of the current bloc around independence, which still includes significant working class support alongside significant middle class support, if that wouldn't start to break down.
That'll probably be a running theme for us.
Yeah, we're going to be running a series of articles, maybe like podcasts and stuff as well, discussing, on the kind of salmon and sturgeon thing. Because the last, few months of this stuff have been totally grim and just sucked the life out of the debate around Scottish independence. But it is totally bizarre to be watching two factions in the SNP staving each other's heads in, and you're just looking at it thinking, and these are, let's be honest, these are forces. There are different elements involved in the mix there, in this faction fight, but the headline leadership figures on either side share essentially the same politics. So yeah, we need to move on.
I agree. I mean, all of that feels quite depressing. In a way, do you know what I mean? But you're right, we have to find a way through the salmon versus sturgeon binary. Well, first of all, they're not on opposite sides, of course. Like, the point that you keep making whenever we talk about this is that sturgeon and salmon, they used to be like a really close political duo.
Yeah. And there are differences in their political orientations, but they are marginal.
Yeah.
And there's a significant
that's the thing about this whole thing that frustrates the life out of me, that ideologically, like, when it really comes down to it, in terms of how these people see the world, how they choose to understand the world, there's fag papers between them. Yeah,
absolutely.
Conspiracy theory klaxon. Would you like to hear my theory about the magpies in Murrell's testimony?
Go on.
So,
yeah, who are they?
Well, first of all, for you, what comes to mind is the scene from The Sopranos. What comes to mind for me is, in The Birds, the Alfred Hitchcock film, when they look out and there's just like the birds are all like in the garden coming to the house.
Yeah.
You know the bit I'm talking about, like, really famous scene. So I am being so conspiratorial here, right? This is what I mean about being neurotic during lockdown. But you know how, like, The Birds is kind of an anti-feminist psychoanalysis of, like, a matriarchal power and, like, women's neuroses.
Right, okay.
You know,
is that a kind of Zizek?
Yeah, like this. I suppose it's a Zizek analysis. I don't know. I think it's a pretty standard, like, I'm sure I've read it somewhere before. Maybe it is Zizek. But anyway, like, it's basically an anti-feminist psychoanalysis piece. It's all about women grappling with their own demons, is like one of the kind of the readings of that film. So obviously, like, that's what I was thinking, is I was like, has Murrell just really told the truth about himself? Is this about his relationship with sturgeon? Am I reading too much into this? Does lockdown need to end now?
So you think he manifested the magpies?
I don't think there was. Yeah. I mean, I think
part of his neurotic talk about sturgeon.
Yeah, definitely. Like,
well, Sturgeon and Murray, if you need psychoanalysis, if you need put on the couch after all this,
I actually think it might be Camille Paglia. I think it might be heart analysis. So, like, I think that there's a Paglia piece where she says that, like, the attacks, like the birds' attacks, correlate with, like, female anger throughout the film.
I see, yeah. And there is the whole kind of, a hen pecking type thing. So you think you think that Murrell was thinking, Every time he's seeing those magpies that only
he's
exist
going to
in
get
his
his
mind,
balls booted by sturgeon.
Yeah, yeah.
You heard it here first.
Yeah, that's a newsworthy take. Others also in terms of symbolism in Scotland, were you heartbroken when Scotland's rugby team did not quote unquote take the knee at some rugby game that was going on? I don't give a shit about rugby.
Right.
Was that the Calcutta Cup?
I don't know if it was like a cup or like an important game. Look, I'm doing like flappy arms.
Birds having a moment.
No, I know it was an important game between England and Scotland because an English comrade in the trade union movement sent me a message saying something like, oh, haha, Scotland's going to get beat, right? So I knew that was happening, but like, I don't know nothing about rugby. Like, how does the scoring system work? It's harder than tennis to understand.
If I remember, because we used to do Ayrshire is one of the places where you do it at secondary school. So in most, yeah.
But that's not middle class.
No. But it's a bit of a myth that they only teach it at kind of private schools and stuff. There are state schools in Scotland and significant parts of Scotland where you get taught rugby. But it's shit. I mean, as I remember, right? So there are a few rules. You can't throw a rugby ball forward, so it's not like American football, right? I think when you score a try, that's 3 points, I think. And then when you boot it through that big thing, I mean, this is ridiculous. There shouldn't be several ways to score, right? Surely
kicking a ball through a giant H takes more skill than running with a ball and putting it on the ground. Well, I suppose if there's other big angry guys after you,
exactly,
that would motivate you. No?
Big posh guys trying to grab you. But anyway, so rugby has this like strange status in Britain where not only is it seen as a posh thing, it's also seen as it's a centre of, you get a special type of anti-posh homophobia, right? Which it was explained to me ultimately relates with, if you think about this, it's pretty grim, to the way working class school boys used to slag off boarding school boys for being gay, but it's not really for being gay. It's about the long traditions of sexual violence at elite boarding schools, right? And of course, they used to play rugby. So you get all these phrases like rugger buggers and so on, right? That's actually the dark roots of fucking hell, where that comes from.
I do feel like it's a middle class thing in Scotland, but I don't think it's like that in other parts of the British Isles. Like, it's not like that in Wales.
It's not like that in Ireland, as far as I know. It's not like that in Wales, no. But that's interesting as well, because that's part of the history of deliberate national differentiation of sports. So famously in Ireland, they invented sports to stop doing English sports. So like they stopped playing like football and tennis and things like that, and started playing hurling to deliberately to differentiate themselves. And as I gather, it's a similar thing in Wales. The reason why rugby is bigger in Wales is because they wanted to have something that was kind of their own. Rugby these days feels like it's bigger in England than it does in Scotland. I hope listeners are enjoying this potted history of modern rugby based on total ignorance.
This is honestly this is the worst part. I don't know anything. Apart from that, Scotland did beat England in the most recent game, which was like a big deal. But that wasn't like the big story. The big story was that lots of Scottish players refused to take the knee.
It was the big story on certain timelines. I mean, perhaps if you weren't a big lefty, you wouldn't even really have known that happened. But I've seen the picture of there's 3 or 4 of them taking the knee, and then the other lot are kind of standing there looking a bit awkward. But what's your general take on that?
My general take on this is that what interests me about political gestures in the public arena, like particularly sport, is I think those gestures have the most impact when it's a really brave thing to do. And like change in politics, like progressive or like liberation or like class conflict, like these things take a brave act, right? I'm not convinced that now sports people, politicians, cops, members of the US military taking the knee like makes it a brave thing anymore. Like I think it was a really brave thing when Colin Kaepernick was doing it in 2016. Like risked his career and his whole livelihood, right? Doing that as a gesture during the American national anthem. It's become so performative to the point that it's now like a liberal corporate expectation that people do it. So when that happened, like with the Scotland team, I think it was the big story. Like it was all over the papers. It wasn't just a kind of like Twitter thing. It was like a real, because there was a minute silence like against racism before the start of the match, I think, and that's why some of them were taking the knee and some of them weren't. Obviously, it's supposed to be a symbol against racism and police brutality. Now, if there had actually been some kind of like protest about like Sheikh Ubayo or something, like there'd actually been like a mention of this man in Scotland who died in police custody, a black man who died in police custody, where there's still no justice or answers for his family, and they didn't participate in that, then I think that would be disgraceful. Like it's become completely performative. You have everybody doing it. I remember seeing a video during some of the BLM demonstrations where there was like members of the military, like taking the knee, like. The only time, what I will say is that the only time recently I think it's been really bold and brave was when the Millwall players in QPR took the knee. Because if anyone who knows anything about football, about Millwall, is that they are fans, like parts of their fans, not all of them, but like parts of their like hardcore fan base are like reactionaries. They are a far right, involved in far right organizations, and they booed. And like coming up against that kind of conflict and putting yourself like in the line of fire for that, I think takes real bravery. Like I don't think that like politicians and civic leaders taking the knee is a brave or bold thing to do. You have people like Justin Trudeau, a very famous blackfacer who did nothing about racism in Canada, but took the knee. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. You've got like these massive contradictions. Then there was also all the kind of woke capitalism that happened around like that gesture, but also the Black Lives Matter stuff. Like Colin Kaepernick, is now the face of a Nike advertising campaign based on like a similar anti-racist message. I just don't see how this gesture has become the be all and end all of an anti-racist movement.
The weird thing is you often hear people saying, it's right to politicize sport. And I agree with that broad argument. I think this idea that you shouldn't have, there are parts of society where politics don't have any remit is a silly idea. But that's not the politicization of sport. It's the depoliticization of protest. It's more like sport invading politics than politics invading sport. And I agree as well. Like if you were making a very specific claim by taking the knee, if you were making a criticism of Police Scotland or the Scottish government, and you could, criticize these institutions on their record, then that would be one thing. But just to take the knee in general against racism, Let's not forget, like, there are very different forms of anti-racist politics, right? There's the anti-racist politics that says institutions like the police, our police, Police Scotland, need a reckoning on the question of racial injustice. And then there's a form of anti-racism that just says racism is like a disease that mostly resides in the population at large, and that needs to be criticized and attacked. The population needs to change. And then, of course, that sets up a very, very different power relationship, because what you're saying is that all the corporations that are flooding anti-racist charities and movements with money are the ones who are the teachers in that didactic situation. And the population is where the problem is, and the population needs to be remedied, needs a reckoning from corporate power, from state power, and so on. So I totally agree with you. And it was just sort of, yeah, go on, sorry.
No, I was just going to say, like, I mean, the thing for me is not that it's just the gestures become meaningless. It's worse than meaningless in a way, because it's kind of become this HR professional thing that you do, like, in society to show that you're part of, like, a civic discussion. Do you know what I mean? So it's like a very, like, professional, managerial HR way of, like, raising the issue without actually changing anything. One of my pals said to me, it reminds her of the ice bucket challenge.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like, that sort of thing. And I do think that, like, politics has a big place in sport, right? So going back to, like, one of those iconic moments of Tommy Carlos and John Smith, who were the two American athletes in the late 1960s, I think it's 68, who raised their fists in a Black Power salute during the playing of the American national anthem when they were getting their Olympic medals. They were suspended from the team, they were stripped of their medals, and I think they were banned from, like, the Olympic Village. And it destroyed them. Like, I'm not saying that people have to sacrifice everything in political, like, actions like that, but it tells you something about the impact of it. Like, when you really come up against, like, power and privilege, then you will get resistance. When, like, there's no resistance to that, and that's when we should be asking questions. What I'd like to see in terms of, you know, actual politics in sport is when Scotland play Israel, that there's some kind of gesture to show, like, an actual anti-racist message.
Well, if you remember when Celtic played an Israeli football team a couple of years ago, Celtic fans got out, you know, had a huge display of Palestinian flags. They were fined. The club was fined for the behaviour of the fans. And of course, they were accused of being anti-Semites. They were accused of being racist themselves. This is the thing. See if you engage in a meaningful, even anti-racist gesture or a symbol or an act of solidarity. You know, you'll know that what you're doing is real because you will be accused of racism. In fact, this goes, you know, for racism, it goes for all kinds of things. Like, if at this point you're not being accused of being a racist, a misogynist, a homophobe, and this, that, and the next thing, it's probably because what you're doing is fake. Like, if you're not being accused of being a reactionary at this point, it's probably because you're engaging in a sort of HR leftism. As you say.
Yeah, I mean, I remember that incident really well when UEFA banned, like, the Palestinian flag at Celtic Park. When that game happened, like, it was what's the name of the footballer again? Ahed Zakut. He's, like, the most famous Palestinian football player. Like, he went on to be a coach, and then he died during Operation Protective Edge in 2014, where over 2,000 Palestinians were killed. Do you know what I mean? There was Israeli warships in 2014 who killed 4 young boys playing football on the beach. Do you remember that? That was, like, a really big story at the time. Do you know what I mean? Like, so when there are opportunities to protest, raise questions about racism, then it has to happen. But this, using an American gesture like that as well, what it does is allows all of the racism in Scotland to just be swept under the carpet.
Yeah, yeah.
we'll do this American thing so that no one's asking questions about Sheikh Ubao.
Mm-hmm.
Or no one's asking questions about like anti-Irish racism or historical anti-Irish racism. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, this does also bring back the fact that there were young guys getting arrested for singing Irish nationalist songs only a few years ago, under rules established by Police Scotland and the Scottish government and so on. I mean, is that not racism? Is that, I mean, it's just not
David, no, because in the HR NGO third sector world, that's sectarianism.
Yeah, and they needed to crack down on. So yeah, I agree, a lot of confusion there. But do you know who is a heroic political activist?
I do. I know exactly who you're going to say.
Well, I mean,
is it a certain little old lady?
She has no authority here. No authority here whatsoever. She doesn't care.
You're talking, of course, about Jackie Weaver of Handforth Parish Council.
Yeah, I'd forgotten that I think in Scotland they might be called community councils, but I'd sort of forgotten that they existed until the appearance of that video, which mainly interested us because it reminds us of very many sort of left-wing meetings we've been in.
Yeah, I mean, it has really united the nation. I mean, it's the first point of unity, like, for a long time, but everyone is united around the enjoyment factor of Handforth Parish Council, apart from maybe a few killjoys, you say?
Oh, yeah. Well, eventually the Guardian, at a certain point in the cycle of the discourse, the Guardian started churning out the usual articles that said that it in fact isn't funny, that it in fact highlights the inequalities faced by groups X, Y, and Z. I think there was basically an article saying this shows that women need to stand up to sexism or something like that. I mean, to be honest, I don't think that there is an egalitarian gloss to put on the fact that what most people found enjoyable about her kicking out that guy out the meeting is, and I was saying this to you, people deep down, right, they want a bit of authoritarian dynamism, right? They don't want to be fucking choked to death by the standing orders. What people really want, right, is for a kind of patriarchal figure to swagger in and say, shut up because I'm in charge.
Yeah.
What's it that guy said? But he failed.
Oh, yeah.
I'm the vice chair.
I take charge.
I take charge. But that's a very instructive thing in psychological relations of dominance and submission, because you don't scream at a screen, I'm in charge, right? I take charge, unless you know you're not in charge, right? Whereas our hero just presses a button and deletes people from existence.
Like, this is what I love about Jackie Weaver, right? Yeah. I'm not really I don't really like this weird Guardian discourse, which their editorial on it was something like Jackie Weaver and the Handforth Parish Council, no joke, right? Which just made me laugh even more. Like, I'm not really interested in the fact that she's a woman and they're men and she's standing up to them. What I'm interested in is they're the ones being sticklers for rules and regulations, and she's just fuck this for a carry on. That's you away. That's you away. She's just so decisive. Do you know what I mean? So authoritative. This is what I'm interested in. Jackie Weaver has the real leadership qualities that we lack.
I agree. I agree. If we had more, people on the left who were just had that degree of decisiveness, then we'd be in a much healthier place. And a total lack of interest in, do you know what I mean? And in what people are going to say to her. I didn't know, but I think the background to all this suggests that she was actually brought in. So that makes it even more interesting. She was brought in to crack down on the dissenting elements in the council, which is why she was told she had no authority here by that guy who tries to sort of precede the meeting without her, instantly whacked. So yeah, I think very much a passing of our time, which is strange because like she comes across as like it's exactly my understanding of what a parish council is. So they're elected technically, but so few people vote in the elections to these councils that people just walk on, right? I wonder if there'll be an increase the next time with these parish councils and in the numbers of people trying to stand for them just for the drama.
I mean, join the left.
Yeah, we're just as irrelevant.
No one votes for it either.
Yeah. But it used to be, so I've had some interesting stuff about them since. They used to be like one of these institutions that were dominated by conservatives, right?
Reactionary as fuck.
Yeah. It's the real, it's parish councils are up there with neighbourhood watch associations.
Aye, curtain twitchers.
Yeah, crypto fascist curtain twitchers, pal clutchers. You know what I mean? I mean, half the rooms in the Women's Institute and all this kind of stuff. But they've obviously, in our era of the hollowed out civic sphere, they have fallen into disrepute, and that's a sad image of what they've become. Apart from the Superman Jackie Weaver, the kind of Nietzschean Superman Jackie Weaver, who's going to revitalize parish council democracy by asserting her dominance over proceedings.
I mean, I am going to make a claim that Jackie Weaver is like, she is the Lenin of 2021. She's a Leninist. Like, she is not like in a moderate reform. She's not into like gradual change. She knows there has to be a revolution, like, and she is not interested in any type of, playing by the rules. She's just taking action.
There's a liberal critique of which I don't think doesn't merit some consideration, of people who want a social revolution, which is that what lefties who want that really want is not a kind of horizontal democratic order. What they really want is for the law to be suspended long enough that lots of decisive action takes place, right? Which I agree with, right? I certainly hope that's the case. I certainly hope that most people just see it as a period where, kind of the separation of powers that's supposed to underpin the liberal democratic state can be ignored for a time while certain issues are taken care of, which is the history of revolutions. I mean, that's ultimately what they're, on one level, they just sort of, they clear house basically after, a period of stagnation, where, for example, the Romanovs have been at the top of Russian society for 300 years, right? There's a few years where basically rules that would otherwise govern society are suspended and things are reorganized. So yeah, I that to me is the we need to think in those sorts of decisive terms.
My favorite decisive moment of Lenin is when he threw all the vodka into the sea because the Red Army just kept getting drunk.
Yeah.
Just during the revolution, that he did not consider whether this would make him popular or unpopular. Probably unpopular. He just knew that the vodka had to go.
Yeah, no, and you don't under those circumstances, right, where you're threatened by counter-revolution and your army is drunk, right? The last thing you want is someone screaming at you, "Read the standing orders,
read it and understand it."
Yeah, you need a bit of a dynamic authority.
Yeah, so this is it. Like, Jackie Weaver is Lenin, and the guys that she throws out the meeting are like the White Army.
Or just the prevaricators, do you know what I mean? The soggy types. Do you know, you can watch all this on YouTube, and now I've said it, it'll be taken down, but you can watch Fall of Eagles, which famously has a scene called an episode called Absolute Beginners. It's about the collapse of the royal houses of Europe at the end of the First World War. But there's a whole episode examining Lenin moving towards the split between the Bolsheviks and the Mensheviks. And he is played by Patrick Stewart, and he's depicted as this granite hard individual who sees kind of far into the future, and he eviscerates the kind of soggy Menshevik type leftists all around him, and he has this kind of pure vision of what needs to be done and so on. It's a slight kind of like mythical view perhaps of Lenin, but yeah, and he is completely brutal in it. It's well worth a watch. If you enjoyed the parish council affair, you will enjoy Absolute Beginners.
Your YouTube algorithm must be so fucked.
It's just all that shit, yeah. All that and sort of weird like theology podcasts by Calvinists, yeah.
Good stuff. Okay, I mean that's a long time we've been talking.
Yeah. Bumper
okay,
edition.
well we'll be back in 2 weeks' time. We're on a 2-week schedule these days, so no like month-long gaps. So we'll see you then. Bye.
Yeah.